The last flag in the Gulf. 100,000 tons of high-grade steel, 2 nuclear reactors, 90 of the most advanced combat aircraft on the planet, and the full military muscle of the world's last superpower, suddenly pivoting, burning engines at maximum speed, fleeing into the open ocean under a hail of Iranian ballistic missiles. That image, an American aircraft carrier in retreat, is now burned into the strategic consciousness of every military planner, every regional strongman, and every adversary who has spent decades studying Washington's weaknesses. Alexei Voronin does not call it a tactical redeployment. He calls it what it is: the moment the ocean stopped being America's domain. In this material, Voronin walks through the full anatomy of what happened in the waters of the Gulf of Oman in the first week of March 2026, a sequence of events that analysts in the Pentagon are already describing as the point of no return. The strike that was supposed to end Iran's nuclear ambitions in a single night. The swarm attack that broke the logic of trillion-dollar defense budgets. The aircraft carrier that fired everything it had and still had to run. Friends, drop your thoughts in the comments right now and hit that like button. Your support is what keeps this kind of analysis alive. We appreciate every one of you. Now let's get into it. Operation Epic Fury, the first move. The sequence of events that brought the USS Abraham Lincoln to the edge of disaster began not in the Persian Gulf, but in the Oval Office, in the final days of February 2026. By that point, diplomacy in the Middle East had not merely stalled, it had been surgically removed from the equation. The United Nations was still attempting to resuscitate what remained of the nuclear framework, but the order had already been signed. Operation Epic Fury was underway. This was not a punitive strike. Voronin is explicit about that. This was the Trump administration's attempt to destroy, in a single campaign, every element of Iran's military-industrial capacity: air defense grids, nuclear enrichment sites, command infrastructure, and the institutional memory of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps itself. According to statements made by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, American intelligence had confirmed that Iran was on the final approach to producing a functional nuclear warhead. A 10-day ultimatum demanding zero enrichment had been ignored. The response came at altitude. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers lifted off in the first hours of the operation and delivered 14 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators onto the nuclear facilities at Stockdale and Natanz. Within the first 24 hours, more than 1,000 targets had been struck, from ministries in Tehran to air defense installations in Isfahan. American generals reported the destruction of 90% of Iran's air force. And yet, as Voronin makes clear, the Iranians were not caught off guard. They were waiting. Dr. Elliot Marsh, a former senior analyst with the Defense Intelligence Agency and now a fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, has been following Iran's asymmetric doctrine for over 15 years. His assessment of what followed is unsparing. Washington made a textbook error, Marsh says. They assessed Iranian military power using the metrics of conventional warfare. But Iran stopped fighting conventional wars in the 1990s. What they built instead was a doctrine designed specifically to make an aircraft carrier the most dangerous liability in any theater, not an asset. Tehran's trap was rooted in decentralization. While American aircraft were expending expensive cruise missiles on fixed radar installations, the Revolutionary Guard had already dispersed. Fleet assets, drone operators, and mobile missile batteries had quietly vacated major bases weeks earlier, redistributing themselves across hundreds of small coves, fishing harbors, and camouflage shelters along the Persian and Omani coastlines. The assets that mattered most were never where the satellites said they would be. The central operational framework for Iran's response was Operation True Promise 4. Rather than attempting to intercept American aircraft, a battle Iran knew it could not win, Tehran chose to saturate the defensive systems protecting the naval strike group in the Gulf of Oman. While the White House called on the Iranian people to overthrow their government, Iranian missile crews were already entering targeting coordinates for American installations in Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain. The primary objective, however, was the still fist of the Fifth Fleet, Carrier Strike Group 3, anchored in the Gulf of Oman with the Abraham Lincoln at its center. The duel in the Gulf. Fire from all directions. On the 5th of March 2026, the radar screens aboard the destroyers USS Spruance and USS Stockdale transformed into something no operator had trained for. Not 2 or 3 targets, not a dozen, hundreds of blinking contacts simultaneously, appearing from multiple vectors, at multiple altitudes, at multiple speeds. Low-flying Shahed variant kamikaze drones skimming the wave surface. Anti-ship cruise missiles threading through coastal terrain. Ballistic warheads arcing down from the upper atmosphere at hypersonic velocities. Even the most advanced battle management software in the world begins to fragment under that kind of cognitive load. Voronin describes the scene with forensic precision. This was a saturating attack of the next generation, engineered not to destroy the destroyers outright, but to force them into spending every interceptor missile in their vertical launch systems. The math was designed to be humiliating. A single RIM 66 or RIM 162 interceptor cost between $2 and $4 million. An Iranian Shahed drone cost less than $50,000. For every wave of swarm drones that crossed the radar horizon, the Spruance and Stockdale were burning through inventory at a ratio of roughly $100 spent to neutralize every $1 of threat. The Phalanx close-in weapon systems fired continuously, throwing walls of 20mm tungsten around the hulls. But the Phalanx is a last resort. It cannot stop ballistic warheads on terminal descent. The fundamental problem was not the effectiveness of the weapons, Marsh says, his tone hardening. It was the finitude of the magazine. A destroyer has a fixed number of cells in the Mk-41 vertical launch system. Once those cells are empty, you don't reload at sea. You sail to a protected port with the proper infrastructure, and in a 500-mile radius, no such port remains safely accessible. When Iranian College Far's anti-ship ballistic missile operators recognized that the destroyer's medium and long-range air defense was functionally depleted, the second strike was ordered. The Spruance entered critical status. Subsequent reports from regional sources, unconfirmed by the Pentagon, described multiple drone impacts on superstructure components, the disabling of antenna arrays, and the loss of several sensor systems critical to coordinating fleet-wide defense. By the end of the engagement, both destroyers had exhausted the operational effectiveness of their primary air defense arsenals. The Abraham Lincoln shield was gone. The mystery of the Abraham Lincoln. The question that haunted the subsequent 72 hours of global coverage was simple. What actually happened to the carrier itself? Official spokespeople for the Revolutionary Guard were unambiguous. They claimed the Abraham Lincoln had sustained at minimum 4 direct hits, 2 from low observable kamikaze drones and 2 from medium-range ballistic missiles. Social media flooded with footage purporting to show smoke rising from the Gulf of Oman. The Pentagon maintained silence for more than 12 hours, a silence that, in the absence of denial, began to function as confirmation. Commercial satellite imagery released in the days that followed did not show catastrophic structural damage. No through-hole penetrations, no large-scale fires visible on the flight deck. But analysts noted something else: unusual activity around the aft section of the hull and along the sponsons. The emerging consensus in expert circles centers on a specific scenario. Iran's warheads may have been set for airburst detonation, scattering thousands of fragmentation elements across the flight deck rather than punching through it. Such an attack would not sink a carrier, but it could, in a matter of seconds, disable every F-35 on the flight deck, shred radar arrays, and blind the communication systems that make the ship operationally viable. What you're looking at, Marsh says bluntly, is a carrier that was functionally decapitated without being sunk. That's actually worse from a strategic standpoint. A sunken carrier is a tragedy. A blinded, paralyzed carrier that has to run, that's a message. The message came in the form of a maneuver. The carrier strike group did not simply shift position. It executed a hard sprint south, withdrawing more than 800 nautical miles, approximately 1,500 kilometers, from the Iranian coastline, deep into the Indian Ocean. In American naval doctrine, this is classified as an exit from the weapons engagement zone. To the rest of the world, it looked like flight. The operational consequence was immediate and devastating. At that distance, the Abraham Lincoln's air wing could no longer reach targets inside Iran without multiple aerial refueling operations. transforming every strike mission into a logistical marathon. The carrier, designed to project power from the adversary's doorstep, was now knocking from a different postal code. Hegseth characterized the withdrawal as a necessary tactical repositioning to preserve operational readiness. That phrase will likely appear in military history textbooks as a masterclass in euphemism. The mosquito strategy: how a fishing boat defeats a supercarrier. To understand how Iran manufactured this outcome, Voronin argues it is necessary to understand a doctrine that Tehran has been refining since the 1990s. The mosquito strategy, also known in Western literature as anti-access/area denial or simply asymmetric sea control. Iranian strategists understood with clarity that in any symmetrical naval confrontation with the United States, Iran ceases to exist as a military force within 48 hours. So they engineered a different kind of battlefield, one in which the size and cost of a vessel become its greatest vulnerabilities. The foundation of the mosquito strategy is mass and disposability. Instead of one cruiser costing $2 billion, Tehran built thousands of fast attack craft armed with low observable anti-ship missiles and torpedoes. These vessels operate out of civilian ports, conceal themselves in coastal geography, and attack simultaneously from dozens of directions. For the radar systems of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, already overwhelmed by drone swarms, a wave of small fast boats against a background of coastal clutter represents an almost unsolvable targeting problem. Mobile launch platforms were equally critical. Unlike the static radar installations destroyed in the opening hours of Epic Fury, Iran's ballistic missile batteries operate from standard commercial truck chassis, constantly relocating after each firing cycle. In 2026, American precision weapons were striking empty decoys, while real Zolfaghar missile systems were launching from residential districts and decommissioned mine shafts. Voronin calls it the War of the Empty Coordinates. The most dangerous weapon Iran fielded in this conflict wasn't a missile, Marsh states. It was a network of sensors, cheap buoys, fishing vessels, commercial drones. They gave Tehran real-time positional awareness of every ship in the theater. The Abraham Lincoln was supposed to be the hunter. Instead, it was the most visible target in the ocean. Underwater autonomous systems added a third dimension of threat. The Gulf of Oman is not deep water. It is a relatively shallow maritime environment, ideal for bottom-laid mines and submarine drones. When American destroyers are forced to run continuous anti-submarine and countermine maneuvers, their overall combat effectiveness collapses. The ship that should be focusing outward is constantly looking down. The economics of defeat. Behind the tactical humiliation lies a financial catastrophe that Voronin argues is, in the long run, more consequential than any single military outcome. The numbers are not abstract. The average cost of an Iranian Shahed kamikaze drone, between $20,000 and $50,000. The minimum cost of a standard missile interceptor required to reliably neutralize it, $2 million. The ratio, $40 to $100 of American defense spending for every dollar of Iranian offensive investment. Multiply that across hundreds of drones per wave, across multiple waves per day, and the arithmetic becomes existential. In the first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury, according to reporting from analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the United States burned through approximately $4 billion in munitions and operational costs, nearly $1 billion per day. This figure was not budgeted for, it was not anticipated, and it cannot be rapidly replenished. Modern interceptor missiles require between 1 and 2 years to manufacture. Iran is capable of producing thousands of drones per month on standard industrial production lines. The asymmetry compounds with each passing week. When the Spruance and Stockdale exhausted their Mk-41 cells in the opening engagement, they became, in Hegseth's own words at a closed Pentagon briefing, something he described using the analogy of deploying a Ferrari to intercept a fleet of electric scooters. Except at the end of the day, the Ferraris are out of fuel and the scooters keep coming. One drone costing $30,000, destroying a radar installation worth $300 million. This is the negative return on investment of modern warfare, and it is precisely the trap Iran constructed. America has never faced an adversary who can make it unprofitable to win, Marsh says. Until now, every successful intercept is also a step toward strategic bankruptcy. That's not a military problem, that's a civilizational problem. Washington and Zugzwang. The political consequences inside the Beltway were immediate and brutal. The Abraham Lincoln's withdrawal triggered a wave of criticism from opposition figures and quiet alarm among Gulf partners, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait, who found themselves absorbing Iranian retaliatory strikes that Washington had not adequately warned them to prepare for. An incident in which Kuwaiti Air Defense Forces mistakenly shot down 3 American F-35 fighters misidentified as Iranian targets in the confusion of overlapping threat environments illustrated just how badly coordinated the campaign had become. Sources in diplomatic circles described the Arab monarchies as furious. They had been drawn into a conflict based on a timeline they were never fully briefed on, and their populations were now paying the price in shot impacts on civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, Donald Trump responded to the strategic setbacks in his characteristic fashion. A social media offensive and a series of public declarations asserting that Iran had already been effectively destroyed, its naval capacity reduced by 90%. They want to talk, the president posted, but I said, too late. The rhetoric of total victory was running directly parallel to a military reality that was anything but. The administration faces what Voronin identifies as a classic Zugzwang, a chess position where every available move worsens your situation, but you cannot pass. Option 1. Commit to a full-scale ground intervention to physically eliminate Iran's mobile launch infrastructure, as Hegseth reportedly floated in closed sessions. Option 2. Continue the current aerial and naval campaign of attrition, at a cost that no defense authorization bill has accounted for. Option 3. Seek a negotiated exit that will be characterized globally as capitulation to a country Washington just spent $4 billion trying to destroy. The confirmation that at least 6 American service members were killed in the first days of the operation sharpens the political edge further. America does not have an institutional appetite for protracted, expensive, inconclusive wars. A lesson the 21st century has already taught twice. 3 scenarios for what comes next. The first scenario, the end of the monopoly on fear. The Abraham Lincoln may not have taken fatal damage below the waterline, but it took a hit that cannot be quantified in hull plates and flooding compartments. The signal transmitted to every regional actor, from Pyongyang to Moscow to Tehran's proxies across the Middle East, is this: the era in which the visible presence of an American carrier strike group was sufficient to suppress an adversary's military ambitions is over. The carrier as instrument of coercive diplomacy has been broken. Voronin calls this the most consequential strategic development since the Falklands proved that surface ships were mortal. The second scenario, the War of Exhaustion. Operation Epic Fury burned through nearly $6 billion in its first 100 hours. The high technology arsenal of the most powerful military in history is not infinite. As the Pentagon quietly transitions to gravity bombs and unguided munitions to conserve precision stocks, it is effectively confessing that the precision strike revolution is temporarily spent. An adversary who merely needs to survive longer than the enemy's magazine depth has already won a significant portion of the campaign. The third scenario, a new architecture of maritime security. The administration is already exploring convoy escort protocols for Gulf tanker traffic and attempting to construct a multilateral framework to share the operational burden. This is an acknowledgement that the United States can no longer unilaterally guarantee freedom of navigation in contested waters. The new architecture will require allies who are watching this campaign with deep concern about what American guarantees are actually worth. The last word belongs to the expert. Dr. Elliot Marsh does not offer comfort, he offers a verdict. What we witnessed in the Gulf of Oman is not an anomaly, it is a proof of concept. Iran just demonstrated to every military power on Earth that you can challenge American naval supremacy without a navy. You need drones, mobile missiles, a sensor network, and the willingness to absorb punishment. The carrier is not sunk, but the doctrine that made it invincible, that doctrine is dead. And every adversary Washington will face in the next 20 years just took notes. He pauses. Then, the really dangerous moment isn't when the carrier gets hit. It's when the next adversary, watching this footage, decides they don't need to fear it anymore. Write your thoughts in the comments. What do you think is the real endgame of this operation? Stay sharp, keep your critical thinking close, and we'll see you in the next one.